The police hit your front door just after dawn, hard enough to make the walls shudder. Before you can even ask what this is about, they say your full name and arrest you for murder. Then a detective turns his phone toward your face. On the screen, a man in a dark jacket is leaving a blood-soaked parking lot, one hand smeared red. He looks exactly like you. And the most terrifying part is not that the police think it is you. It is that, at a glance, you would too. The victim was a man found stabbed to death in the parking lot behind a bar, the kind of place where bad decisions vanish into darkness and nobody remembers quite enough. 2 witnesses told police they saw you arguing with him earlier that night. A security camera from the alley caught a side profile so close to yours it felt sickening to look at. Then came the sketch artist's drawing, less a sketch than a portrait. Even the suspect's car, they said, matched yours in color and model. You told them they had the wrong man. They barely blinked. And that was the moment you understood something brutal. Once the world decides your face belongs to a killer, your voice becomes nothing but noise. They took you downtown and sat you in an interview room so cold and bright it barely felt real. The overhead lights were flat and merciless, bleaching the color out of everything except the crime scene photos spread across the table. Blood on concrete, yellow evidence markers, timestamps, witness statements. A detective sat across from you with the calm patience of a man who believed the ending had already been written. He asked where you were the night before. You told him the truth. Home, alone. No visitors, no calls, no one who could place you there but you. Even as you said it, you heard how weak it sounded. You told them you had never met the victim, never seen him, never spoken to him, never stepped foot into that parking lot. The detective did not argue. He just slid a still frame from the alley camera beside your driver's license photo. Same jawline, same nose, same slight downward tilt of the head. For one sickening second, the room seemed to tip. You stared at the 2 faces and felt a flash of cold move through your chest, because from that angle, under that light, even you could see why they were here. Then they asked about the scratch on your hand. It was small, half-healed, nothing. You told them you scraped it on your car door a few days ago while unloading groceries. The detective wrote it down with the slow, deliberate care of someone recording a confession in disguise. That was the moment panic stopped feeling loud and started feeling heavy. You realized this was no longer about clearing up a misunderstanding. This was the point where their version of the story began to close around you, tightening inch by inch until every answer you gave sounded less like defense and more like proof. The public defender came to see you with a paper cup of burnt coffee and the kind of expression people wear when they are already measuring loss. He did not waste time trying to comfort you. He told you the case was bad, very bad. The witnesses were certain, and certainty, even when it was wrong, played beautifully in front of juries. The camera footage was blurry in all the ways that mattered most, which meant 12 strangers would be invited to finish the image with their own fear and assumption. The sketch was close enough to do damage. Not perfect, but perfect was never the standard. It only had to feel true. After he left, you kept seeing the face from the footage. Not just similar, not in the ordinary way strangers sometimes resemble each other across a crowded room. This was different. This was the kind of resemblance that made your skin crawl. The same line of the jaw, the same bridge of the nose, the same slight angle of the head, as if he had borrowed not just your features but your habits. You replayed the image until it no longer felt like evidence against you. It felt like a message. And then your mind began doing what terrified people always do. It started searching backward. Had anyone ever stared at you a little too long in a grocery store line? Had anyone ever lifted a phone in your direction and lowered it too quickly when you noticed? Had some stranger passed you on the sidewalk, then turned for a second look as if checking something against memory? Tiny moments you would have dismissed before now came back sharpened and strange. That was when the thought arrived, irrational, impossible, and once it appeared, it refused to leave. What if this was not an accident? What if the man in that footage did not merely look like you? What if he meant to? News of the arrest moved faster than truth ever could. By the second day, your name was no longer just your name. It was a headline, a whisper, a lowered voice at the edge of every room you had once entered without thinking. Co-workers stopped speaking to you the way they used to. Some avoided your eyes entirely, others looked too directly, as if they were trying to see whether murder had changed your face in some visible way. Neighbors who once waved from porches now spoke in fragments behind half-closed doors. Curtains shifted when you passed. The world had not convicted you yet, but it had already begun rehearsing. The worst part was how suspicion entered love, quietly, carefully, like something ashamed of itself. Your wife, your girlfriend, your partner, whoever had once known the private shape of your life better than anyone sat across from you and said the words people say when they are trying to be loyal and frightened at the same time. I believe you, but that single word split everything in half, because once but enters the room, trust is no longer trust. It is a negotiation, a pause, a tremor in the foundation. Then the prosecution made its offer. Plead to manslaughter, they said, and the sentence would be lighter, measured, manageable. Your lawyer told you with painful honesty that this might be the safest path left, not the just path, not the true one, the survivable one, and for the first time, you understood how innocent people end up confessing to things they did not do. Because when every eye lands on the same face and every voice says, "That is him," truth starts to feel thin, fragile, almost imaginary. But you refused. Not because you believed the system would save you, not because you were certain a jury would see through the lie. You refused because pleading guilty would cost more than your freedom. It would hand your face over to him forever. It would turn resemblance into identity. It would make his crime live under your skin, in your name, in every mirror for the rest of your life. Pleading guilty would not have meant only going to prison. It would have meant signing a document that said, your face belonged to a murderer. By the time the trial began, you understood something ugly about courtrooms. They are supposed to be places where truth is uncovered, but truth is rarely the first thing to arrive. Story gets there first, and the prosecution did not need to prove every shadow, every missing minute, every weakness in the evidence. They only needed to tell a version that sounded cleaner than yours, simpler, sharper, easier to hold. The first witness pointed at you without hesitation. No trembling hand, no uncertainty, just a finger lifting in open court and a voice saying, "That's him." The second witness said they would never forget that face. Never. As if memory were a blade that never dulled. As if fear had photographed you perfectly in the dark. You sat there listening to strangers speak about your face with more confidence than you had ever felt in your own life. Then the CCTV footage went up on the large screen. The room changed when it appeared. You could feel it. Jurors leaned forward. The gallery went still. For a moment, every eye in that courtroom moved back and forth between the glowing image on the screen and the living version of you sitting at the defense table. Screen, face, screen, face. It was not just evidence anymore. It was comparison, a ritual. A slow public merging of two men who were not the same, but looked close enough to destroy the difference. Your attorney fought where he could. He pointed out the blur in the frame, the bad lighting, the dead angles, the distortion, the basic and well-documented failures of eyewitness identification. He spoke about uncertainty, about how human perception fills in gaps and then mistakes those inventions for facts. But once an image lodges itself inside a jury's mind, reason usually arrives too late. Logic becomes an afterthought, the picture stays. And then the sketch artist testified. The drawing was set beside you for the jury to see. Not exact, not flawless, but close in all the places that mattered. Close enough to make people feel the click of recognition. Close enough to bury nuance, to flatten doubt, to help kill a life without shedding another drop of blood. You sat there in that suit, under those lights, listening to your own face being used against you, and for the first time a truly horrifying thought took shape. If you had never existed at all, if there were no real you sitting there breathing and blinking and denying it, maybe they would have found this easier to question. But because you were real, because your face was available to be compared, measured, and mistaken, you became the final piece that made their story feel complete. When the jury came back, the room seemed to hold its breath for half a second longer than it should have. You stood because your lawyer touched your arm, but your body no longer felt like something fully connected to you. Then the foreperson spoke a single word: guilty. After that, the rest reached you as if through water. You heard fragments, not sentences, numbers, legal terms, the shape of a future collapsing into years. The judge kept speaking, your attorney kept moving, someone behind you let out a sound that might have been a sob, but it all felt far away, as though the verdict had pushed the world to the other end of a tunnel. When the bailiff took hold of your arm to lead you out, you turned for one last look. The victim's family was crying, not performative grief, not courtroom theater, real grief, the kind that bends people inward. You did not hate them for it. You could not. In their eyes, the man who killed someone they loved was standing only a few feet away. They were wrong. And yet, their pain was still real. That was the cruelest part. The lie had stolen you, but it had not given them peace either. Then the sentence came down hard and long, and a steel door closed behind you with the kind of final sound that makes a life split cleanly into before and after. In prison, the question that followed you was not how do I get out? It was who used my face to do this. That was the thing that stayed with you in the dark, in the noise, in the long stretches of institutional time that made every day feel copied from the one before it. Men around you obsessed over appeals, dates, parole, leverage, survival. You should have been doing the same. Instead, your mind kept circling the same impossible shape. Somewhere outside these walls, there was a man who had stepped into your life without ever meeting you, worn your face like a disguise, and walked away while you were buried under the consequences. Then memory became its own prison. At night, lying awake on a narrow bunk while pipes knocked inside the walls and somebody down the tier muttered in their sleep, you began asking yourself questions you once would have called insane. Was there any gap in your memory from that night? Any missing minute? Any blurred stretch of time your mind had quietly sealed over? Could stress do that? Could shock? Was it possible, however impossible it sounded, that you had been there and somehow broken away from it inside your own head? Innocence, under enough pressure, stops feeling clean. It becomes something you have to keep proving to yourself. So you started writing the timeline. Hour by hour, minute by minute. When you got home, what you ate, when you took off your shoes, what was on television, which light you left on in the kitchen, the sound of the faucet, the time you checked your phone. Every detail became a thread, and every time you wrote it down, it felt less like note-taking and more like tying yourself to the version of you that still made sense. Because if you stopped, even for a day, you were afraid the other story would begin to sound stronger. One night, an older inmate watched you filling page after page and asked what you were doing. You told him, and he stared at you for a second with a kind of tired recognition that felt worse than pity. Then he said, "You don't have to do it. You just have to look like the guy who did." And somehow, that was worse than the sentence, because by then, part of you had already started wondering whether a face could be enough to erase a person from the inside. The case might have died there if not for the kind of people who are drawn to cracks in official stories. A freelance journalist came first, then an appellate attorney, then an independent investigative group that had built its reputation on the cases everyone else stopped looking at. They were not interested in your innocence because of sympathy. Sympathy solves nothing. They were interested because certain details in the file felt too neat, too rehearsed, too eager to become truth. So they pulled the case apart piece by piece, not looking for miracles, only for repetition. And repetition is exactly what they found. Months before the murder, possibly longer security cameras in other places had captured a man who looked disturbingly like you. Not once, several times. A gas station on the edge of town, a convenience store parking lot, the entrance to a motel 2 counties over. Each sighting shared the same eerie logic. The figure was always far enough away for the resemblance to register, but not close enough to survive scrutiny. Always in the edge zones of footage. The places no one studies unless something goes wrong later. It was as if someone had been testing distance, practicing visibility, learning how to be seen just enough. Then one of the original witnesses was re-interviewed, away from the pressure of court, away from the confidence that grows when people are applauded for certainty. Memory loosened. The witness remembered one small detail that had never made it cleanly into the trial record. The man they saw favored his left hand. He had gestured with it, reached with it, carried tension through it. But you were right-handed. Another recovered camera angle from a separate location suggested something else. Subtle, but real. The man in the footage had a faint limp, a slight hitch in the gait, almost invisible unless you slowed the video and watched it again and again. That was the moment the case changed shape. This was no longer a story about random misidentification or ordinary bad luck. It began to look like design, like selection, like someone had not merely resembled you, but had chosen to let that resemblance do work. The most horrifying thing was no longer that there was another man out there with a face close to yours. It was that he seemed to understand exactly how to use that face as a weapon. The deeper investigation did not uncover some clean, cinematic answer. It found something worse, something plausible. The real killer was not a stranger pulled out of nowhere by fate. He appeared to have brushed against your life years earlier in the loose, half-forgotten geography of childhood and bureaucracy. You had both grown up in the same broad area. Not on the same street, not in some dramatic side-by-side destiny, but close enough for your lives to have passed through the same broken systems. Old neighborhood records, a pediatric clinic, a county housing file, maybe an adoption intake office, maybe a youth services archive, maybe nothing more than 2 names moving through the same neglected machinery at different times. The point was not blood, not some oversized biological twist. The point was access, proximity, observation. At some point, long before the murder, he may have seen you and understood something terrifying. Your face was close enough to his for other people to do the rest. He did not need a perfect match. He did not need science fiction. He only needed the kind of resemblance that would survive panic, survive darkness, survive a witness who wanted badly to be certain. He understood the weakness at the center of the system better than the system understood itself. Courts, cameras, police reports, eyewitnesses, none of them required absolute truth. They only required a version that looked complete when viewed from a distance. That meant you were never random. You were selected. He did not just kill a man in a parking lot. He built another life to bury beside the body. And the most chilling part was how little he actually had to do. He only had to place your face near the crime and trust the world to finish the construction for him. The appellate attorney filed to reopen the case, and this time, the story that had buried you began to split at the seams. New footage surfaced from cameras never properly reviewed the first-time angles, wider, cleaner, less flattering to the prosecution's certainty. A witness amended earlier testimony, no longer willing to confuse confidence with memory. Location data complicated the timeline that had once seemed airtight. Then came the harder evidence, the kind that does not care how persuasive a face can be. Biometric inconsistencies, forensic traces that did not align, DNA, and prints that refused to become yours, no matter how badly the original case had wanted them to. And across multiple incidents, the same pattern emerged again and again, a man close enough to you to trigger recognition, distant enough to survive it. The real suspect was finally identified after another violent case put him back in front of cameras. Maybe he was arrested on a different charge. Maybe the truth only surfaced because he grew careless. But when the footage of his transfer appeared, you saw him clearly for the first time. And it felt like looking into a mirror that had learned cruelty. The resemblance was real, but not complete. His face carried the rough outline of yours enough to fool a witness, enough to poison a jury, but emptied out somehow. Colder, thinner, wrong in ways that had nothing to do with bone structure. He looked like your face after something human had been hollowed out of it. Not identical, just close enough to ruin a life. The conviction was vacated. The court said the words, "People imagine," will bring air back into the lungs. Your name was cleared. You were declared not guilty. Around you, there was relief in every direction, lawyers exhaling, cameras gathering, strangers calling it justice at last. This was supposed to be the moment the music changed, the moment the nightmare broke. But standing there, you felt no triumph, no clean surge of vindication, only a vast, numb emptiness, as if the years had been cut out of your life so violently that even freedom had nowhere natural to land. Because what had been taken from you was never just time. Time was only the visible theft. The deeper loss was harder to name. It was the ordinary safety of moving through the world inside your own face, the unthinking trust that your reflection belonged to you and you alone. You could walk out of prison now. The doors could open, the state could admit its mistake, but none of that could erase the thought that would stay with you afterward, that somewhere in the space of a passing glance, a dim hallway, a grainy screen, someone could still mistake you for him. You return to ordinary life, or something that wears its shape. The apartment is still yours, the street is still the same, morning light still falls across the bathroom sink, exactly the way it used to. But the mirror is different now. Or maybe you are. You can look at your own reflection, just not for very long. Because the newspapers once printed his face beside old stories about yours, and most people do not read carefully enough to separate one from the other. They skim, they blur. They remember the feeling of a story more than its facts. A few people apologize, most do not. Life moves on for them because they were only ever passing through your disaster. You are free, but freedom is no longer simple. You have to live inside a face that was once used as a weapon against you. And that is the cruelest ending of all. The worst prison is not the place where they lock you away. It is when they turn your own face into a crime scene you have to carry for the rest of your life.